This wasn't just any old mansion. Built in 1892, the house stood alone, isolated, surrounded by miles of dense, towering forest that seemed to protect it or perhaps contain it. Shadows fell heavy on its cracked walls and twisted iron gates, giving it an air of something almost alive. The locals call it the Screaming House. They speak in hushed voices of the sounds they hear at night, muffled screams, raw and desperate, echoing through the trees, carried by the wind. They say the cries aren't just sounds, they're warnings, like an unholy invitation to those who might wander too close. And yet, some did enter over the years: the curious, the thrill-seekers, those who thought the stories were just old legends. But none of them left unchanged. They emerged with haunted eyes, some speaking of cold whispers and shadows that followed them, clinging to them like the memory of something terrible. Those who know the house know better. They say no one goes in and stays the same. Some claim it's alive, feeding on fear, watching, waiting for the next soul to step inside. Jack and his friends had heard the rumors, like everyone else in town. But Jack, well, he never put much weight in ghost stories. To him, it was just an old, empty house, wrapped in myths that only small towns seemed to cling to. It's just a house, he'd say, a cocky smirk on his face. What's it going to do? Stare us to death? He laughed at the warnings, shrugged off the strange tales, convinced that fear was something people made up to scare themselves. Jack's confidence, though, was only skin deep. He wore it like a mask, one he hoped his friends couldn't see past. But they could see it, or maybe they sensed it, in those small moments when his laughter lingered a little too long, or his gaze dropped just slightly, almost as if he were daring himself more than anyone else. Jack wasn't alone. His friend Sam had his reasons too, though he wasn't as bold about it. A quiet observer, Sam had been drawn to the supernatural for as long as he could remember. He'd spent hours reading about haunted places, ghostly encounters, stories of lost souls trapped between worlds. But what his friends didn't know was that Sam's fascination wasn't just idle curiosity. He was looking for something, a sign maybe, to prove to himself that there was more beyond the veil. Sam had lost someone close to him, and he hoped, perhaps in some unspoken part of his mind, that in places like the house, he might find a connection, a hint that his loved one was still out there somewhere. So, when Jack invited him along, he didn't hesitate. Then there was Sarah, the skeptic. She was practical, grounded, always ready with a reason to dismiss anything that couldn't be proven. For Sarah, the house was nothing more than a pile of bricks and broken memories, a relic of the past. She told herself she'd go to put Jack and Sam's fantasies to rest. And yet, in the quiet of her mind, even Sarah couldn't ignore the nagging curiosity. She'd heard her mother's stories as a child, stories of strange things that lurked in the dark, stories her mother swore were true. Her mother would warn her about old places like this, saying, "Some places hold memories." Sarah, memories that aren't always friendly. Sarah laughed it off, but those words had never quite left her. And then there was Rachel, the friend with a heart too kind for her own good. Sensitive and intuitive, she always felt things more deeply than the others. Some called it empathy. She called it a burden. She'd been the one to get uneasy, even looking at the house from a distance. The one who had shivered when she heard the stories of people changed by their time there. Rachel didn't even want to go, but her friends insisted, pulling her in with that mix of peer pressure and loyalty she couldn't resist. Deep down, though, Rachel knew she was the type of person who felt things others couldn't. Her grandmother used to tell her it was a gift, that she could feel the echoes of lives past. She never believed it, until now. As they gathered that evening, the sun dipping below the treetops, there was a chill in the air, a heaviness that seemed to settle over each of them. They'd agreed to meet up and go together, thinking that safety in numbers might make it feel a little less real. But with every step closer to the house, their chatter grew quieter, each of them feeling that creeping doubt, that silent, unspoken question. Was this a good idea? But no one dared to back out. Jack led the way, shoulders set, determined to prove the others wrong, to face down the legends and come out unscathed. Behind him, Sam kept his distance, his gaze fixed on the house, looking for any sign, any movement, something he might capture and study later. Sarah trailed close behind, hands shoved into her pockets, fighting back the nervous energy that made her fingers itch. Rachel stayed close to the back, her eyes darting nervously as though expecting something or someone to leap out of the shadows. She didn't know if it was the house or just her mind playing tricks, but with every step she felt a growing sense that something was watching, something patient waiting, as if welcoming them home. Each one of them carried something into that house that night, whether they realized it or not. Little fears, memories, shadows of things that haunted them in the quiet moments of their lives. Jack's bravado, Sam's silent grief, Sarah's skepticism tinged with family warnings, and Rachel's unwilling sensitivity. They each thought they'd be safe together, protected by friendship, but the house, it knew, it could sense them, and it would use those weaknesses, twist those fears until they had no choice but to face them head on. Because no one steps inside the house and leaves the same. The walls themselves seemed to lean in as they crossed the threshold, swallowing the last sliver of light as the door creaked shut behind them. For the first time, they were enveloped by the house's silence. And it was in that silence that they each felt it, something watching, something waiting, as though it had been asleep for years and had now woken to greet them. Jack's laughter had faded, Sam's eyes had grown dark with apprehension, and even Sarah, the skeptic, felt a chill run down her spine. And Rachel could feel it most of all. She could feel its hunger, its desire to know them, to explore their fears, to taste their vulnerabilities. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "We shouldn't have come here," but it was too late. They were already inside, and the house was ready to begin. It started quietly, just a shiver in the air, a faint hum of something not quite right, something they could almost ignore if only they tried hard enough. At first, they clung to the idea that it was all in their heads, that nothing unusual was happening at all. But the house was far from silent. Each step they took seemed to echo just a moment too long, as though the walls were listening, recording every sound, every movement. And then, slowly, one by one, the house began to reveal itself. It was Sam who noticed it first. He wandered into a dim room lined with ancient mirrors, each cracked or faded with age, their surfaces warped like they'd been bent by some invisible force. He could see his own reflection, but something wasn't right. His face looked different. In the shifting dimness, his eyes appeared hollow, almost as if something within the glass was draining him, studying him. He shifted, moving closer, his face drawing near to his own reflection. But then, he wasn't alone. Just behind him, a dark figure began to materialize, not in the room, but in the reflection. A shadow with eyes so deep they seemed to pull him in. Sam gasped, spinning around, but behind him, the room was empty, heart pounding. He turned back to the mirror, but his reflection stared back, silent and alone. Was it just his imagination, or had he just glimpsed something lurking, waiting for him in the depths of those ancient mirrors? Meanwhile, in the hallway, Sarah brushed it all off, as she always did. Old houses make noises, she told herself. But then, she began to hear something else. A faint whisper, a single voice, but coming from everywhere at once. It was soft at first, like someone speaking in another room, a faint murmur she could almost ignore. But as she moved down the hall, the whispers grew clearer, rising and falling, sometimes overlapping, voices of men, women, children, each one speaking in tones of fear, pain, and longing. She tried to shake it off, laughing nervously, but there was something in one of the voices, a woman's, gentle yet insistent. She paused, and the voice seemed to grow louder, almost pleading, calling her name, as if trying to tell her something, warn her of something just beyond her understanding. Sarah's hands shook, and a chill crawled up her spine, but she refused to turn back. She couldn't, or maybe she didn't dare to. And then there was Jack. He wandered into one of the upstairs bedrooms, where an old chandelier hung, its crystals catching what little light the dim room offered. He felt drawn to the space, though he couldn't say why. Maybe it was the room's quiet elegance, or maybe it was the unsettling calm that made his skin prickle. As he took a step further in, a low creak echoed above him, and the chandelier began to sway, slowly at first, then faster, until it clinked and chimed like something was shaking it. Jack chuckled nervously, muttering to himself that it must just be the old floorboards. But the chandelier seemed to be mocking him, swinging more violently, its light casting twisted shadows that danced along the walls. Then he saw it, a flash of movement in the far corner of the room, just a glimpse, gone in a blink. His pulse quickened as he stared at the spot, hoping to see nothing, yet fearing that he'd see everything. Downstairs, Rachel wandered alone, trailing her fingers along the peeling wallpaper, her heart pounding as she felt a weight pressing down on her. She didn't want to be here, didn't want to know what the house held for her. But as she turned the corner, she came face to face with an old, cracked portrait hanging on the wall. It was the face of a woman, pale and sorrowful, her eyes filled with something like despair or rage. Rachel felt her gaze draw her in, as if those painted eyes held secrets she wasn't meant to know. She moved closer, almost hypnotized, and suddenly she saw it. The faintest twitch in the woman's expression, a glint of recognition in her painted eyes. The room seemed to close in around her, a faint humming filling her ears, and then the woman's painted lips seemed to part, almost as if whispering something. Rachel stumbled back, heart racing, unable to shake the feeling that this woman, this stranger from another time, was watching her, watching and waiting. Each of them felt it, this growing sense that something was wrong, but they told themselves it was just the atmosphere, just the dark playing tricks on them. They tried to laugh it off, to shake off the chill that crept down their spines, but the house was just getting started. As they wandered deeper, each of them felt it, the air thickening, pressing down, filling their lungs with an invisible weight. Jack tried to brush it off, but he couldn't ignore the prickling at the back of his neck, the way his skin felt as if it were being watched. And when he turned, he saw her, a figure in a faded dress, her face hidden, standing silently in the doorway. He blinked, and she was gone, but the memory of her lingered, a shadow that clung to the edges of his vision, haunting him. In the basement, Sam found a set of old photographs, faded and frayed, scattered across a dusty table. He picked one up, the image almost too faded to make out, but there was something about it that seemed familiar. The figures in the photograph were blurry, their faces distorted, yet as he stared, they seemed to shift, their features twisting into something he recognized. His own face stared back at him, frozen in the grainy, black and white image. He dropped the photo, heart racing, but when he glanced back, the faces were gone, just empty eyes and vacant expressions. But he could feel it now, something from the house was looking back at him, watching from within those shadows, waiting for him to let his guard down. Sarah felt it too. In the library, a single book lay open on the table, its pages blank. Yet when she looked closer, faint words began to appear, scrawling across the pages as though written by an invisible hand. They were her own thoughts, her own fears, laid out in ink, things she'd never spoken aloud, things she didn't even fully understand. The words bled across the pages, forming twisted sentences, spelling out her doubts, her insecurities. She slammed the book shut, backing away, her pulse pounding in her ears. But the words were etched in her mind now, haunting her, whispering that she wasn't safe, that she would never leave this house. And Rachel could feel it most of all. She could feel the house's pulse, like a heartbeat under the floor, a rhythm that seemed to echo her own, growing louder, more insistent. The walls seemed to close in, the rooms shifting, leading her in circles, trapping her within a maze of empty corridors. She heard her name whispered in voices she didn't recognize, voices that grew louder as she tried to run, her footsteps echoing through the empty halls as if someone or something were following her, just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to make itself known. By now, each of them knew, deep down, that this was no ordinary house. It was alive, and it knew them. It knew their secrets, their fears, their doubts, and it was feeding off of them, twisting their reality, drawing them deeper into its grip. They could no longer deny it. The house was haunted, not just by ghosts, but by something much darker, something that wanted them, that needed them to stay. And as they realized this, they each heard it, the sound they'd been dreading since they'd arrived. A low, guttural scream, echoing through the halls, rattling the walls, filling every room with its piercing, chilling cry. It was as if the house itself were screaming, calling out to them, telling them that they had nowhere to run, that this place was theirs now. They were trapped, and the house was just beginning. It was only now in the depths of their fear and exhaustion that they began to understand. The house was not just haunted. It was aware, intelligent, something far more sinister than any of them could have imagined. It was watching them, waiting for them to weaken, feeding off their terror, like a hungry predator. Each breath they took seemed to sink them further into its hold, binding them with invisible threads woven from their own dread. They tried to rationalize, to tell themselves it was just an old house with creaking floors and eerie echoes. But deep down they knew better. They could feel the malice pressing down on them, thick and suffocating. Jack was the first to try the doors. He ran, desperate, back to the main entrance, the others close behind. But when he turned the brass handle, the door didn't budge. He twisted it harder, then slammed his shoulder against it. The door didn't even shake. It was like trying to move a solid wall. Jack cursed under his breath, frustration and fear twisting together as he pounded against the wood. One by one, they tried every exit they could remember, doors that should have led to the outside, to freedom. But each door was sealed shut, unyielding, or worse, opened up to reveal a hallway they didn't recognize, or a room that shouldn't have been there. It was as if the house itself was shifting, changing, responding to their desperation. Sarah's voice was tight with panic as she tried a side door, pulling on the handle with all her strength. "This doesn't make any sense," she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. But sense had abandoned them the moment they'd stepped inside. Each attempt to escape only deepened the mystery, turning the familiar into the bizarre, the ordinary into the horrifying. Rooms they'd seen only hours before now looked different. Furniture rearranged, dust thicker in the corners, windows that had once looked out onto the forest, now revealing only blank, unending darkness. The house was closing in, trapping them in a maze with no escape. They began to sense the presence of those who had come before them, past residents of this cursed place, as if echoes of their lives still lingered, waiting, watching. Rachel found herself drawn to a faded family portrait hanging on a cracked wall in a room she didn't remember entering. It was of a family, all dressed in the fashion of an earlier century. Parents and two young children, their faces eerily lifelike, almost as though they might step out of the frame at any moment. But their eyes were wrong, hollow, as if something had drained the life from them. A shiver ran down her spine as she realized that these people were once trapped here too, held in the same prison the house had made for them. She turned away, but not before she caught a glint in the mother's eyes, a glint that looked almost like recognition. And Sam, pacing back and forth in a hallway that seemed to stretch on endlessly, began to feel a chill rise within him as he saw a figure in the distance, a figure moving towards him, yet without any sound. He froze, squinting, trying to make out the details, but the figure never got closer. It was there, yet not there, a shadow caught between reality and nightmare. He backed away, heart racing, the realization dawning that this wasn't just a ghostly figure, but perhaps the remnants of someone else who had been lost here long ago. Someone whose presence remained, echoing, drifting through the house like smoke. They gathered back in the grand foyer, breaths ragged, each face pale with fear. This was no ordinary haunting. This was something ancient, malevolent, something that understood them, that anticipated their every move. Every step, every desperate attempt to flee was met with walls that shifted, staircases that spiraled into unknown rooms, doors that once led to safety, now leading into darkness. They could no longer rely on the layout of the house they had once known, for it was clear now that the house was shifting, bending to their movements, responding to their every thought. It was alive in a way that no structure should be, like a living, breathing entity with a purpose they couldn't comprehend. And then the whispers began again, the voices of those who had come before, at first faint, almost like the wind rattling through the walls, then louder, insistent, filling their heads with fragments of stories, of memories long forgotten. They heard names, Eliza, Thomas, Henry, names from different times, different generations, each voice carrying a warning, a story, a piece of the puzzle. They began to piece together fragments of the house's twisted history, the lives it had consumed, the souls it had trapped within its walls. These voices spoke of terror, of broken minds, of despair so deep it twisted the very fabric of reality. Some begged for freedom, others warned them to leave, to run, though the doors were already sealed tight. Jack's hands shook as he clutched an old journal he had found, the pages brittle, the ink faded with time. It belonged to a man named William Hart, who had lived in the house decades before. William's words were desperate, scrawled across the pages with a shaking hand. He spoke of hearing voices, of seeing figures in the mirrors, of feeling a presence watching him, following him from room to room. In the final pages, William wrote of how he had tried to escape, how the house had turned against him, leading him in circles until he was hopelessly lost. His last entry was chilling. The house knows me. It feeds on my fear, and soon I fear it will consume me entirely. Jack's voice cracked as he read the words aloud, the truth of them settling like a weight on their hearts. Each of them began to see flashes of the past, visions that seemed to bleed through the walls, memories of people who had lived and died within these cursed halls. Rachel saw a woman in a faded gown, sobbing in a corner, her face hidden in her hands. When she looked up, her eyes were hollow, empty, as if her soul had been drained. Sarah heard the laughter of children, high-pitched and echoing, though the halls were empty, the laughter growing fainter, as if it was being pulled into some dark abyss. And Sam could hear the faint strains of a piano playing, a haunting melody that seemed to drift from somewhere deep within the house, though he knew no one was there. They tried to hold on to each other, but even that became impossible. The house seemed to separate them, leading them into different rooms, shutting doors behind them, twisting halls into endless loops. Every attempt to regroup was met with walls that seemed to stretch and shift, hallways that spiraled into darkness, and rooms that once held furniture, now empty and cold. Each of them was alone, isolated, left to face the house's horrors, without the comfort of companionship. Sarah found herself in a room she didn't recognize, lined with shelves of ancient books, their titles faded, their pages brittle with age. As she reached for one, it fell open in her hands, revealing a single phrase repeated over and over. "You will never leave." She dropped the book, backing away, her heart racing as the words seemed to echo in her mind, a cruel promise whispered from the depths of the house itself. The more they fought, the more they realized the house was feeding off them. Every scream, every panicked breath seemed to give it strength, solidifying its walls, closing its doors. They were trapped, and the house was alive in a way none of them could fully comprehend. They could feel its heartbeat, a slow, steady thump that pulsed through the floors, the walls, the very air they breathed. It was as if they had become part of it, woven into its fabric, its history, their lives now entwined with the countless souls it had claimed before. They tried to fight, but the house adapted, blocking every exit, turning each step into a futile spiral of confusion and terror. And as the whispers grew louder, as the visions became clearer, they could feel it, the weight of all those who had come before, trapped, lost, screaming silently for release. And they knew, with a sinking dread, that they were destined to join them, another chapter in the house's dark, unending story. They found themselves drawn deeper, led as if by unseen hands, down twisting corridors and staircases they didn't recall until they reached a room unlike any other in the house. The air was thick, almost suffocating, as though years of pain and anger had steeped into the very walls. The darkness was so profound that their flashlights barely pierced it, the faint beams swallowed by shadows. And then, in that oppressive blackness, they saw it, a figure hovering just beyond the edge of light, a mere outline of a person twisted by sorrow and rage. The apparition stepped forward, revealing a face both human and not, distorted by centuries of torment. Its lips were frozen in a silent scream, eyes wide with an emotion that seemed to transcend anger, something more ancient, more primal. It was then they understood this was no ordinary spirit. This was the source, the keeper of the house's darkest secrets, bound to this place by a pain so immense it had seeped into every corner, every fiber of the structure. Sarah's heart pounded as the figure's gaze fell upon her, cold and piercing. She felt its gaze not just on her, but within her, as though it could see her every memory, every fear, every vulnerability. Her mind was filled with images that weren't her own, flashbacks of lives long extinguished, faces twisted in agony, hands reaching out in desperate pleas for escape. She could hear voices now pleading, accusing, begging her to understand. But understand what? Her head throbbed as their cries grew louder, overlapping, each one a piece of the sorrow and rage that kept the entity chained to this place. Jack stepped forward, trying to shout, to demand answers, but his voice died in his throat. The figure turned towards him, its expression shifting, and he was suddenly overtaken by a vision. An old man sitting alone in the house's parlor, his face buried in his hands, weeping as he read a letter over and over. The words were blurred, but Jack could see the pain etched in the man's face, a deep sorrow that clung to him like a shroud. He understood somehow that this man had been broken by a loss so profound it had carved itself into the very bones of the house. And then, like a wave crashing over him, Jack felt it, the grief, the bitterness, the anger. It flooded his senses, drowning him in a sea of emotions that weren't his own, emotions that clawed at him, as if seeking release. He stumbled back, gasping, trying to shake the feeling, but it was no use. The house had taken hold of him, weaving its pain into his very thoughts, blurring the line between past and present, between himself and those who had come before. Rachel clutched her head as images flooded her mind, scenes of horror, of despair. She saw a woman standing in the room where they now stood, her face pale, her eyes hollow, clutching a small, delicate locket that trembled in her hand. The woman was murmuring something over and over, her voice cracked and raw. Rachel strained to hear, the words barely a whisper. They took him, they took him. The woman's grief was a living thing, raw and unyielding, filling the room with sorrow so intense it was like a physical weight pressing down on them. Rachel's heart twisted, a flicker of recognition sparking in her mind. This woman, she had lost someone she loved, someone taken by the house, and her spirit had never moved on, trapped here in a cycle of endless pain. The figure grew stronger with every vision, its presence more solid, more tangible. It fed off their emotions, drawing power from their fear, their confusion, and their empathy. It seemed to grow, towering over them, a looming specter of despair, its features shifting, transforming, reflecting each of their deepest fears. For Sam, it took the form of his mother, her face twisted in disapproval, her voice echoing in his mind, reminding him of every mistake, every regret. For Sarah, it became a childhood friend lost too soon, a reminder of the innocence and joy she'd never regained. And for Rachel, it took the form of herself, her own face distorted and hollow, a grim reminder of the person she feared becoming. As each character looked into the apparition, they realized the house had been showing them pieces of themselves, of their own traumas, their own weaknesses, each one woven into the spirit's sorrowful story. It was no mere haunting, it was a reflection, a mirror held up to each of them, revealing truths they had long buried, fears they had tried to escape. The house was not just feeding on their fear, it was using it, twisting it, amplifying it, drawing them deeper into its web. They tried to turn away, to break free from its grip, but the house had them now, its dark tendrils wrapping around their minds, binding them with memories that were not their own. It was then that they heard it, a voice faint and echoing, drifting from somewhere deep within the house. It was the voice of a child, singing a lullaby, the haunting melody carrying with it a sense of loss, so profound it made their hearts ache. The voice grew louder, closer, and as they listened, they understood. This child was part of the tragedy, the first soul taken by the house, the first link in the chain of sorrow and rage that bound the spirit here. And then in a final, harrowing vision, they saw it, the event that had set everything in motion, the tragedy that had cursed the house. A family trapped by the house's madness, each one driven to despair, until one by one, they had succumbed to its darkness. They saw the mother, her face twisted in grief as she clutched her child's lifeless body. The father, his eyes empty as he stared into the void. This was the source, the origin of the haunting. The pain of this family, their suffering and loss, had become the very heart of the house, a wound that had never healed, a scar that had festered over centuries. And now, standing before the spirit, they understood that the house was not merely a place. It was a prison, a tomb, a monument to pain and despair. The spirit looked at them, its eyes hollow, its face twisted in a mixture of rage and sorrow. They could feel its pain, its desperation, its longing for release. But they also understood that this was a cycle, a curse that could never be broken, a chain that would only continue, binding each new soul that entered its walls. Jack took a shaky breath, his voice barely a whisper. "What do you want from us?" The spirit didn't answer, but they could feel its answer, like a dark whisper in their minds. It wanted release, freedom from the endless torment, from the curse that bound it to this place. But it wanted something more. It wanted them, their souls, their fear, to feed its power, to sustain its existence. And they realized, with a sinking dread, that no one would leave this place unscarred. The house had claimed countless souls over the years, each one adding to its darkness, each one becoming part of its twisted history. And now they were part of it too, bound to the house by fear, by grief, by the very emotions that the spirit fed upon. They knew that even if they escaped, they would carry this place with them, its darkness etched into their souls, its whispers forever echoing in their minds. They were trapped not just in the house, but in its story, bound to its curse, forever part of its legacy. As they stared into the spirit's eyes, they understood the terrible truth. The house would never let them go. It would haunt them, follow them, cling to their minds like a shadow that could never be escaped. And as the darkness closed in around them, as the house tightened its grip, they knew that they were no longer just visitors in the house. They were part of it now, woven into its walls, bound to its curse, forever lost in the house that screams. When the sun finally rose, its first light broke through the trees, casting long, twisted shadows over the house. From the outside, it looked the same as it always had, weathered, silent, untouched by time. But inside, remnants of the night lingered, faint echoes trapped within walls that had borne witness to every desperate breath, every scream, every fading heartbeat. The house had claimed them, as it had so many before, swallowing their stories, their fears, and their very souls. And yet, a strange stillness filled the rooms. Where once there had been muffled voices and hollow footsteps, there was now only silence, a heavy, suffocating quiet. Days turned to weeks, and soon those who remembered the friends, who'd entered began to lose hope. The searchers eventually gave up, and life continued as it always does, moving past the shadow of the house as though it were just another forgotten landmark on the edge of town. But some nights, locals swear they can still feel it, that deep, oppressive chill that seems to seep out of the very soil, an unspoken warning to stay away. Those brave enough to venture close might feel a strange pull, a whisper at the edge of hearing, and if they're very still, they might even hear the soft creak of footsteps just inside the door, or a faint, nearly silent voice calling, pleading, almost familiar. The house still stands there, waiting, watching, its secrets hidden behind dust-covered windows and creaking floors. The children who walk by on dares say they hear voices, whispers that drift through the trees, as if carried on a wind no one can feel. Some hear laughter, others hear crying, and on rare, cold nights, they say you can hear the screams, faint, distant, as though trapped between worlds. No one truly knows what happened to those who entered, but the legends have only grown, woven into the fabric of the town's darkest stories. And then, without warning, a new rumor began to spread. Visitors claimed to see faces in the windows, strangers, pale and hollow-eyed, staring out as if waiting for something or someone. Some say the faces change, new expressions appearing one day and gone the next, their eyes haunted, pleading, their glimpses quick and elusive, seen only in the corner of an eye, but enough to leave a chill that lingers, a reminder of the house's insatiable hunger. The townsfolk don't speak of the house much anymore, not openly, but the whispers have only grown, fueled by each passing year and every quiet night where strange sounds echo from somewhere in the distance. Over time, a new story has taken root, the tale of those who dared to enter, who were swallowed by the house and never truly left. Some believe their spirits still wander the halls, trapped in endless loops of fear and desperation, reliving their final moments again and again, bound to the house by something darker than death. And so, the house endures, standing alone at the edge of town, its doors closed, its windows dark. To most, it's just an old relic, forgotten by time. But to those who remember, who have heard the stories passed down, it's a place of shadows and secrets, a reminder that some places hold onto their ghosts, and that some stories never end. Because in the dead of night, if you're brave enough to walk by, and if you listen closely, you might still hear them, the whispers of those who dared to enter, who never truly left. The faint sound of footsteps that fades into silence. The echo of a scream lost to the wind. A cry for help that will never be answered. The house keeps them like chapters in a story it will never let go. And even as the years pass, as generations forget and stories fade, the house waits, a silent sentinel of all it has claimed, all it still desires. For it knows that one day, someone else will come, someone curious enough, bold enough to test the legend. And when that day comes, it will be ready, its doors will creak open, and it will welcome them with all the dark hospitality it has honed over a century of solitude. Because the house is patient, it always has been, and it knows that sooner or later, someone will come again. The house that screams is never truly empty.